Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Today, I'm answering part 3 of the Q&A I announced last week to celebrate my first Booktube anniversary. Let's get straight to the questions. The first question today comes from Matthew of Mayberry Book Club, who asked what some of my favorite museums in the DC area are, as well as who my favorite visual artists are. Matthew is a fantastic artist himself and a storyteller extraordinaire, so I'm a little hesitant to start talking about art with him, but here goes. One of the really wonderful things about living in Washington, D.C. is the number of museums, both art museums and other kinds of museums, located here in town. Many of them are free, an especially wonderful thing if you have a youngster who loves to go to the museums but doesn't want to stay for more than an hour or two, which I definitely did for many years. That particular youngster is now mostly grown up, now has a longer attention span, and still loves to go to museums. Plus, he's home for the year. But sadly, I'm afraid the pandemic is keeping us from going to any of our favorite spots right now. So, favorite museums. Let me first name a non-art museum that I have special ties to, the Smithsonian Museum of American History. While it's not a museum I visit terribly often, they often have fascinating exhibits. Since in the last part of this Q&A, I talked about my father and his book about slave culture on the coast of South Carolina, I'll talk about an exhibit that really resonated with me when it first opened. My husband and I went together in the late winter of 1999 when I was significantly pregnant with that kid I would like to be going to museums with now. The exhibit David and I saw back then was called something like Communities in a Changing Nation, focusing on 3 different 19th century communities. We were there just as the exhibit was opening, and actually only 2 of the communities were open that day since they were still polishing up the 3rd part. When we entered the rooms, we had no idea what was coming. But the first room was about Jewish immigrants in Cincinnati, Ohio. Seeing the exhibit primarily about the development of early Reform Jewish communities felt really personal for David, who grew up in Reform Judaism, albeit in New York. And then we walked into the next room. Sure enough, it was about slaves and free blacks in the Low Country of South Carolina, and it pretty much quoted my father's work in several of the wall texts. Pretty amazing. I have another connection with the museum, too. I've mentioned before on this channel that I wrote a book about a black deaf man in 20th century North Carolina who was wrongfully accused of a crime, castrated, and institutionalized for many decades without ever being found guilty and without ever being diagnosed with any psychological disorder. Despite the fact that Junius Wilson was institutionalized, he made money, which started when he dug up worms near the creek that ran through the institution property and sold the worms to community members who fished there. His financial schemes expanded over the years. He used his work money to buy snacks at a very local quick shop and sell those to the fishermen too. He then invested that profit in a bicycle, which he rode to a far less expensive grocery store a bit further away, bought snacks, and sold those to the fishermen, making quite a bit more money since he was paying far less for the snacks. It's kind of a long story, but the gist of it is that the bicycle gave him tremendous independence, despite the fact that he was nevertheless institutionalized during all of this. One of the bicycles that he had during his many decades there was still at that institution when my co-writer and I were writing the book. We facilitated moving that bicycle from the state hospital to the Smithsonian Museum of American History, where it has been displayed in the highlights hall visitors pass through when they enter. So all in all, this museum is a special place for me. As for art museums, I really love going to the Hirshhorn, a place that tends to exhibit quite a bit of fairly contemporary work. I loved seeing an exhibit about Marcel Duchamp back perhaps in December or early January when most of the world was still open. Whenever we're there, I visit one of the paintings from their permanent collection, a painting by Marston Hartley called Christ Held by Half-Naked Men. I also really love visiting the Phillips collection, a private museum that has an amazing set of works, including the half collection of Jacob Lawrence's Migration series. A few years ago, the Phillips managed to borrow the rest of the paintings in the series and staged a full showing of all of Lawrence's paintings in order. It was really magnificent. Although the National Gallery of Art is not actually in my top 3 favorite local art museums, it is the museum I probably visit most. In general, I really enjoy small museums more, especially museums with a homey feel like the Phillips Collection and the Renwick Gallery. But because the National Gallery is so enormous, spanning 2 huge buildings connected underground, I think I probably go there the most to view assorted selections from their incredible collection. 2 of my very favorite visual artists have had outstanding exhibits mounted there. The first is Calder. I first fell in love with Calder when I lived in Philadelphia in the early 1990s. He was born and educated in Pennsylvania, and both his father and grandfather were creators of major public artworks displayed in the city. Rumor has it that a major new Calder museum is scheduled to open in Philadelphia sometime soon, right near the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the phenomenal Barnes Museum. I will definitely be taking the train up whenever it's completed, if I can. Calder's playful mobiles and stabiles really fascinate me, and I'm actually especially fond of his very small works. Perhaps my favorite exhibit of all time at the National Gallery was a show of his work many years ago that used careful lighting, as well as very gentle and targeted simulated breeze to make the mobiles move and cast incredible moving shadows around the room. That style of display was totally new to me back then, but of course now it's quite common in museums. My other major favorite artist is Miro, who maybe a decade ago had a spectacular and large, almost complete exhibit also at the National Gallery. I fell in love with Miro when I was a freshman in college. My roommate was looking for a poster of some of the art of Kandinsky. I am not a big Kandinsky fan. For my taste, there's always too much going on, all on top of each other. I get that's kind of the point of his work, but it wasn't a point I really wanted represented in our dorm room, a room where I wanted to find at least a bit of reprieve from the chaos of campus life. I knew very little about 20th century art at that point, and I'm still very much not an expert in any way. As we flipped through the posters, I tried to convince my roommate to choose Paul Klee instead. Art that felt similar in some ways, but also had a kind of peace, almost stillness to it. And then I found a picture by Miro. And then another one. And within moments, I was a Moreau stan, as the new parlance has it. I now know that his work changed and developed across his lifespan, but at that moment I was seeing some of his most widely known pieces. They had less of a sense of chaos than I felt when I looked at Kandinsky's work, but more playfulness and excitement than I saw in Klee. Miro has remained a favorite ever since, and at some point I realized how much similarity there is between the shapes Miro often painted and the structures Calder often built. Well, I've gone on and on about artists and about museums. There's another museum story, but I think I'll hold it until the world reopens and my family feels safe visiting again. I'll tell the story here as part of my celebration. Deal? On to some more questions. Jason at Byways and Bookland says, my question is, why was Ireland, hands down, your favorite vacation ever. And when you come back, can you bring some of the sourdough creations which grace your Instagram account? Although I might not have used quite such extravagant language about the trip, I think it's actually accurate. Jason's referring to a trip to Ireland that David and I made with our son several years ago for him to study traditional Irish music in a tiny town in Donegal in the upper northwest of Ireland. While Abraham was in classes and performance all day, David and I started reading James Joyce's Ulysses aloud to each other. Each day, we'd individually read several different commentaries for each chapter, but come together to read Joyce's text aloud afterwards. Sometimes we holed up in our tiny bed and breakfast room to avoid the rain. Other times we sat outside in the sunshine, passing the book back and forth as sheep gathered around us to listen. So honestly, Jason, what could be better than 2 weeks of trad music, great beer, wonderful friends, an amazing book, and fleecy animals galore to make this bookish knitter happy? Well, maybe the amazing home-cooked breakfast we got each morning. Actually, funny miscommunication story there. On our ride up to Donegal, one of the local residents on our bus pointed out a wonderful old pub in one of the towns we drove through. "Look at the detached roof on that pub," I thought I heard him say. What on earth was a detached roof? I know nothing about architecture, but I kept pondering what it meant. We eventually arrived at our little bed and breakfast in Donegal. While Abe and David unpacked and started naps to help them get past the jet lag we had, I chatted for a few minutes with the owner. We talked about our kids. One of hers had a zillion step dancing trophies scattered around the house, and then talked a bit about the history of the town. And then she threw out, "Treacle Irish?" I stared at her blankly. Treacle Irish. What did she mean? She saw my concern and explained, "I could cook something vegetarian or something else if you would prefer. Usually we have eggs and sausage and 3 full Irish breakfasts." The Irish pronunciation of the TH sound, at least in this part of the country, seemed to be how I would pronounce a solitary T, and not with the th sound, at least a lot of Southerners in the U.S. say it. Got it. So I played through the detached roof story. And of course, what the man was telling me was to look at what I would pronounce as the thatched roof. A charming roof, which I had appreciated, luckily. When the world opens up again, I would love to travel back to Ireland and to travel around Scotland as well, which I've not visited since I was 3 years old. And I also have to figure out how to travel with sourdough starter so I can share fresh bread with y'all. The next 3 questions all address the same general theme, faith. So here goes. Please know that my answers here are my own answers only, not any statement about what other people ought to believe or how they should practice. At least a couple of these questions gave me the out, so I could refrain if I wanted not to answer, and I appreciate it. Religion is a very personal thing. But for me, that doesn't mean I want to keep it private, just that I hope you'll all understand that I am only talking about what feels important to me personally, not what I think you should believe or do. So here it goes. First, Courtney Ferreter, America's Jewish mother, says, "Of course I would ask this question, but would you talk about some of your relationship to your Jewish identity? I think I've heard you say that you were raised more religious and now identify as secular. Yes? Not really. I grew up in a fairly small town in the South, and almost everyone in my community was some variety of Protestant Christian. Both my parents had grown up in somewhat religious households, my father as a Presbyterian and my mother as a Methodist. When they were growing up, churches were rigorously segregated racially. Both my parents were very active in the civil rights movement, and both started leaving their religious communities during that time because of the racism they saw in their churches, specifically the anti-civil rights rhetoric they saw emerging there. My mother's father had been completely secular for her whole life. He died when she was 14 years old, but he had shown her a model of a deeply ethical man, sort of an Atticus Finch, that was unconnected to belief or practice. My father really was not exactly an atheist, but his personal beliefs were not the kind of beliefs that really fit in Protestant churches either. Our family embraced the practice of dyeing Easter eggs in the spring and filling Christmas stockings in the winter, but these were cultural, not religious celebrations for my family. It's a very long story of how I came to really want both faith and practice, and perhaps most strongly to want a community based on contemplation and kindness and filled with people of all ages. And I don't think this channel is a place to share all that right now. Suffice it to say that when I was in my early 20s, I was searching for a church I could attend. I first tried Methodist and Presbyterian churches in my Philadelphia neighborhood. I just didn't feel comfortable there. I felt like I shouldn't even be saying the words if I didn't believe them. It seemed like that would be lying. It basically felt like I was lying just to walk in, saying I was a person of faith every time I walked in the door. Eventually, I found myself going regularly to Quaker meeting, sitting in silence, only very occasionally broken when a fellow worshiper felt moved to stand up and share words. I loved it in many ways and felt comfortable there, but it wasn't helping me feel connected to the faith I was still hoping for at that point. Well, at some point in this quest, I started spending time with David. We had no intention to date seriously, especially. Even after we did start dating seriously, we knew we would be breaking up at the end of the year when I had plans to move to North Carolina to research a dissertation project. But some crazy events reshaped both my plans and our relationship. I've actually told that story before, and I'll link to it below. It isn't about faith at all. Anyway, David had grown up in a Reformed Jewish household and synagogue. I loved his home practice of Judaism. Before we started dating, I often brought wine and challah to his house, where we would share a Shabbat dinner over the candles. He knew I was looking for some spiritual home of some sort, and he shared an idea that suddenly made it seem so much more possible. That my idea that faith had to precede practice in order to be honest was not the only way to look at it. That potentially practice could lead to faith. Liberal Judaism, Reconstructionist rather than the Reformed Judaism that David practiced, called to me. My library carrel, where I studied every day for my dissertation, was located right near the Judaism section, and increasingly books about Jewish belief and practice joined all the history books on my carrel shelves. I didn't tell David I was reading these books. It absolutely wasn't about him, and I didn't want him to fear that it was, or to think I was that serious about him. Instead, I told myself that after I moved away, I would look more into the possibilities. At some point, when we had gotten a bit more serious than we had intended, he took me up to New York to visit his parents. His mother asked him privately if he was thinking of asking me to marry him. When he said he kind of guessed he was, she asked if I would be willing to convert. That night we went to the local diner for French fries and hot tea. He told me about his conversation, making it very clear that he was not asking me to marry him at that point, but he was curious about the second part, the conversion part. I immediately told him everything I had been studying and learning and why I felt so connected to Judaism. He was a little taken aback, I think, but also kind of pleased. I just said I felt connected to Judaism, and there are several reasons. I'll mention 3 here. First, it's a faith that is deeply committed to ideas of justice, and it's a faith that values learning and study. And, wildly different from what I grew up seeing, it's a religion that actually does not require full faith to be a member in good standing. Commitment matters, but belief is not essential. Doubt is accepted as a temporary state probably felt by many people in the congregation, and perhaps a permanent state for a few. Well, I was one of those who, despite time learning and practicing, never developed faith, never started to believe. It's a long story, but the time came when our son was a pre-adolescent and made it clear he did not want to be involved with religious practice at all. We continued some home practice for a while, but stopped going to Shabbat services. Our home practice at this point is unstable. We do some things, but not other things, do some things sometimes, but don't at other times, etc. And that's where we are. I sometimes joke that I am an atheist Quaker Jew, and honestly, that might be pretty close to the whole story. I'll go on to the next question. Josh at Josh's Book Voyage asked something similar but with a twist at the end. I know you've spoken some about this before, but I'd love to hear more. What is your relationship with religion, gods, and spirituality? And how does that influence, if at all, your reading? What a fascinating question. Because of my connection to Jewish practice, I do read more than the typical amount, I suppose, of writings about Judaism, especially the links and the contradictions sometimes between contemporary Jewish practice and feminist ideology. I'm not sure why, but I've always been interested in how people talk about their own faith or lack of faith. Marilyn Robinson and other authors who address faith with her quiet and non-evangelical tone, inspiring in its message but fully respectful of the great range of human beliefs and practice, write works I often find extremely moving. One of my favorite reading challenges this year was maybe Midrash, and I listed so many books for my pile of possibilities, as Sarah at Hardcover Heart says, that I am all set for several more months of reading. Perhaps it sounds perverse to some, but I am really drawn to authors and characters who are highly contemplative, either in religious or secular ways. In a related but slightly different question, Taya Elizabeth, commentator extraordinaire, whose name I may be mispronouncing, Thea, I'm sorry. Anyway, she says, I find your channel intellectually stimulating but also soothing and reassuring. Where do you place your spiritual life and thoughts? What do you do to renew yourself? Lovely question. It comes at a time when I think I need a little reminding to renew myself. Thank you. I'm realizing that I'm not actually doing things right now to help me grow in ways I might need to grow, the ways I need to be renewed. I stopped keeping a real journal some time ago, and although I often find myself working through particular issues by writing what are basically one-off journal entries, I think I could conceivably find a great deal of help if I start some more formal journaling again. I think that if I can work through some of the sadness and fear I'm feeling at the current state of the country and the world, I might be a lot nicer to my family members, for example, and to be more aware of the impact of some of my words. For more surface-level renewing, I think knitting and baking bread are perhaps the two most calming things I do. Both are crafts that engage both my physical body and my more emotional and intellectual sides at the same time. Another favorite ritual is taking warm baths. I really have not done much of any of these three things over the summer. It was just too hot. But the temperatures have cooled, and I think I should get back to all three calming behaviors. If any of you have ways you find to renew yourselves in the deep way, to help you through especially challenging issues at times when you feel like you're sometimes trapped in yourself, I would really love to hear some of your stories if you feel comfortable sharing, either here in the comments or through my Voxer account or my email, both listed below. On to the final set of questions for this birthday Q&A. I received a few questions asking more about my specific ways of filming these Booktube videos. Hope P. asks about the books behind me, and several other people have asked me in the past for a shelf tour. I've mentioned the books behind me in at least one video, but I've been planning a full behind-the-scenes video, which I'm thinking I will film for sometime near the end of this month if I can get to it. Una at Codex Cantina has asked me elsewhere about how I film, and I think the behind the scenes tour might answer a few of his questions as well. Sherry Hart said she's considering creating a Booktube channel herself and would love to hear about how I deal with my intense camera shyness. Elsewhere, she said she'd like to see a separate video about how I film and edit. This made me think I might put together something like How to Start a Booktube Channel, the Introverts Edition. My own filming situation at this point is not something that would necessarily make sense for everyone, but I'll be happy to share some of the ways that seem to work for me. It may take me a bit longer to figure out what to say and to get it filmed and posted, but I'll definitely put that on my list. It might be as late as December. And Sherry, I highly recommend creating a channel. This year on Booktube has been a really phenomenal one for me, intellectually, socially, even in terms of building skills that I can imagine will be useful in the future. Definitely give it a try. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks so much to all of you for these great questions and also for making Booktube such a wonderful place for me over the course of this year. You have helped me appreciate the breadth of literature and the bookish life far more than I had ever seen before. Booktube has introduced me to bookish people all over the world. This is an amazing place. I'll be back in a day or two with another contribution to the general conversation here. I hope you'll join me. See you soon.